We'll see. Record from there. And then I'm going to hand over to James. Do you want the screen?
Yes,
James, do you
please.
want? Yeah. So I need 2 participants, James, and make co-host. That
Thank you.
should do it.
Ooh,
Make co-host. Done.
great.
All yours, James.
How's that? So great to see you all. I thought that, well, today I'm really pleased to be talking about worldviews. And I thought I'd start off with talking about, what is a worldview, and also why do they matter? Because I remember it's only a year or so that I've had any idea at all what worldviews were. I'd never heard of them before. And so we'll start with what they are and why they matter. And the ones we'll run through are naturalism and atheism, existentialism, stroke postmodernism, new age paganism, deism, pantheistic monism, and theism. So there's lots of fancy words. And sort of, if you look in the books, they come by lots of different. So that's my list of them. Okay, that's my list of 6 main, and you ask anybody, they'll have a slightly different one. But I thought before I do that, I'll say a little bit about me. Now, Lorna knows me very well. Malcolm does actually. Bruce. So Emmy, you know my son. So I will, for anyone else, that is my family. So that is Amanda, JJ, number 1 son, Millie, number 1 daughter, Darwin the beagle, the cats, Darcy and Reef, and our robot lawnmower, who's called David Moe, because we're a blended family. And a little bit about me, I'm an architect. So that was a theatre I got to design in Morocco. And I got the opportunity of meeting the King of Morocco. So that was my 15 minutes of fame, was meeting the King of Morocco, who's got the bright purple shirt. I like running. And I did this about a year ago, which was I ran did the Pennine Way as an event. So that was 400 kilometers from near Sheffield to Scotland. And this was a moment where I've been out in the middle of the night on the worst part of the course, which you're not really supposed to do on your own. And it had been a really bleak night. And then as the sun was rising, I came on this site. And this is a famous little hut, which was just like, to me, this was like, the night is passing over and, it's reaching the safety. But I love this. I kind of find myself in the mountains. It's important to me. I do love a bit of teaching stuff and biblical studies. This was a great trip to Turkey along the first missionary journey. And this is the bit where John Mark stops being with Paul and Barnabas. He's described at some point as abandoning him, but we won't go into that. We can listen. But this was, I love teaching, and I've been pursuing that for about 4 or 5 years. And another side of me, I do think, is all this kind of stuff. So I'm ADHD and dyspraxic. I've had some mental health issues related to the death of suicide of my nephew. I've got arthritis in my hips, scoliosis. I got a dynamic hip screw, a lump of metal in my left thing. Tough times, redundancies over my career. Spiritually, the end of the riverside was a tough time. And I really feel like, blessed are the poor in spirit. It's good to be reminded of things where we are not just all rah-rah. And as Paul says, I'll boast in my weaknesses, and God could be strong. So all of that, to me, lines up to a key scripture for me. I've come that they may have life and life to the full. I claim that scripture. I claim life to the full, which is all of the stuff above, including all the weaknesses as well. Moving on, this is an interesting book by Sky Jaffanri and Malcolm and I are teaching on that in the North next month. People say that all religions end up in the same way. And Sky has, this is this diagram that Sky has done. So, there's Judaism and Christianity and lots of other things. And people say they end up in the same way. But Sky makes a comment in the book that maybe this is a better one. The starting point, we all share a world confused by chaos. From this common beginning, the paths diverge dramatically, but each one is an attempt to overcome suffering, fear, and death. And I agree with Sky on this, that each of us is really trying to make sense of a really chaotic world. And I know that was the case for me, and I feel like Christianity has really helped me in making some sense of it. But I did mention I'm ADHD, and the psychiatrist who diagnosed me was really surprised at how well I've been able to cope in a world which is organized for and by neurotypicals. It's definitely a world where I am a stranger in a strange land. But I think a lot of us feel like that, Christians as well. You know, Peter says, I urge you as foreigners and exiles. You know, we are foreigners and exiles in the world around us. This world is not our home. And by studying worldviews, I think we can understand the people around us much better who live in that world, a world which is alien to us. Looking at worldviews, we can, before we start to consider others, I think I would like us to consider what we believe. What do you believe with a worldview? So tackling the worldviews to actually think about yourself and what you think about the world around you. So we're all Christian theists here. That's our primary worldview on the definition, probably. But you probably have a secondary worldview and maybe a third or something. You have some other things which affect the way that you think, you know, what you really believe, you know, and, you know, people who don't believe in any God are atheists, but some people believe there's no objective truth. That's a very common worldview nowadays. It's a postmodern worldview. And actually, I think a lot of younger people have that view that there isn't an objective truth, even in the Bible. It's up to whoever believes in it. And, you know, I shared those slides of me earlier. And part of the reason for that is so you can understand a little bit about me. When you understand a bit about me, you know, there's a quote, "Tout comprendre, c'est tout pardonner," which is loosely translated is to understand all is to forgive all. Madame de Stael, a Swiss 19th century. So if you understand people better, and I think that's what we need to try and do and helps us with understanding worldviews. Carl Jung said, if one does not understand a person, one tends to regard him as a fool, which is cutting. You know, we believe we're all created in the image of God, and we should see God in everybody that we see around us, everyone that we meet. And that's part of loving our neighbor as ourselves. And we should have this, I really encourage people to have this endless curiosity in the unique creations that God has made in each and every human we meet. But with that, not everybody sees the world that we do. So if we can understand how each other understands the world, if we treat each other with respect, we can coexist, we can work, we can live together, but we can also reach out to people as well. And so let's look at some worldviews. So James Sire has written the kind of universal book on this. If you really want to understand this, his is probably the best respected. The Universe Next Door, which is this book here. I do recommend it. It's a bit big. I do say, do not go out and buy this version of The Universe Next Door, which is completely different, because that's what I did. And I read the whole of that book as well before I realized I had the wrong book. James Sire's The Universe Next Door is an excellent, if slightly bookish book. And he says, for any man to be fully conscious intellectually, they must have a worldview. So it's really important and to know what your worldview is. And that is a set of assumptions that provide the foundation on which they live and have their being. I think it's a really good definition of what a worldview is: a set of assumptions that provide the foundation on which they live and have their being. I do think everybody has one. I do think a lot of people have no idea at all what their worldview is and are very mixed up about it and have buried it very deep. Um, and I think the best way is just to go through the main worldviews we talked about. So here they are: naturalism, modernism, atheism, nihilism, Marxism. I'm kind of grouping those together. Existentialism, postmodernism, which is an unworldview. New Age, paganism, deism, Eastern pantheistic monism, Hinduism, Buddhism, and theism, which is Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And I am going to explain them. And they are the basic understanding of how they see the world. You know, are you a Christian? Do you believe there's an unknowable God or force? Are you an atheist, a postmodernist, Muslim? They all really, really affect the way you see the world and everything about it. And there's good worldviews and not so good worldviews. And I think it's really good to have a judge of what makes a good worldview. Is it true? Is it consistent with reality as we can observe it? Or does it successfully answer the important questions that humans ask? I mean, is it of any use as a worldview? And those who ascribe to it are better human beings for having taken this as their worldview. You know, I think those are three really, really good questions. I wish they were mine. They're not, but I thought they're really powerful questions. Like, what makes a good worldview, and are good things to question somebody about, and to move on to. And you know, other questions. How can we deal with grief? Some worldviews don't have that. What is my purpose? Do I have a purpose? How do we know what is right and wrong, morals and ethics, and what happens to a person at death? Those are big questions, and a worldview should be able to do that. So let's start: naturalism, modernism, atheism, nihilism, Marxism. So Thrasymachus, about 375 BC, said, "Without God, might makes right." So this goes way back, 2,500 years ago. This guy in Plato's Republic is recorded as saying, without God, there is no God, might makes right. Whoever is the strongest. Very kind of, that's what Alexander the Great said on his deathbed. He said, who will have the empire, whoever is the strongest. You know, like, who cares? Just be strong. And atheists that shape our society, the main three: Nietzsche, Marx, Freud. These guys have changed, you know, tens, hundreds of millions, billions of people's lives by their thinking, and it's useful for us to understand, you know, what they think, what's good, what's not so good about it. Nietzsche, God is dead, is famous for saying, you know, and he says that mankind must reinvent itself through the Ubermensch, the Superman, in a new image of greatness. I grew up, I didn't think I knew much about this, but I grew up reading Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, Catch-22 by Joseph Heller, Fahrenheit 451, Franz Kafka, some Ernest Hemingway. They're great works of literature, and I really love those books, but they reinforced to me that nihilism is a very honest response to being a naturalist, to being an atheist worldview. I've got to say, if I wasn't a Christian, I'd be a nihilist. It's tempting, but it is unbelievably negative to me. You know, if you follow that way, there is so much darkness and hopelessness in it. And you have to look, one of those questions: what does the effect it have on its followers? Very much Nietzsche's teaching had a very profound effect on Adolf Hitler. And you know, Christians, oh no, English soldiers, British soldiers, went off to war with a copy of the Bible or the New Testament in their breast pocket. Hitler's Third Reich went off to war with a field grey edition of Nietzsche's teachings in the pack, which taught them that God is dead and, you know, the Ubermensch, they needed to reinvent themselves in it. So what is that? And within that, the purification of the Aryan race from Jews, gypsies, the disabled was completely acceptable. It's hard to read about this. If I wasn't a Christian, I'd be a nihilist. Marxism, the Little Red Book of Chairman Mao, which I have somewhere. You know, and it's interesting to look at Marxism, the atheist teachings. Their followers include the USSR under Stalin, China under Mao, Cambodia under Pol Pot, North Korea. All the greatest genocides of the last 100 years don't come from religious wars. They come from, and most of them come from these atheist developments. Interesting to look at scientists. A lot of people think that this is, you know, the science is the atheism, and naturalism is the religion of the scientists. But Darwin wrote 3 years before his death, "I've never been an atheist." Einstein says, "I'm not an atheist." And Francis Collins, Francis Collins is the guy who was responsible for mapping the DNA. So a profound scientist. He's also written this, The Language of God, which is an excellent book. And scientific surveys say that the majority of scientists believe in a personal God. So going back, the question is, does atheism make you a better person? Does it? I've had a crisis of faith as a young Christian, you know, whether God existed. And my answer to that was, I knew that evil existed because I had done evil. And therefore, if evil exists and I had done evil, then that led logically for me that Satan exists. And if Satan exists, so also does God. And having looked at all the various gods of different religions, the only one that's true to me is the Christian God. So that's my answer to it, you know. And I think it's helpful to give answers, to ask questions and to give answers on it. Let's move on. Existentialism and postmodernism. And I've wrapped these two together. I think it's reasonable as similarities, and there's loads of overlap to it. So existentialism is very much a kind of descendant of nihilism. Because nihilism was so dark, so unbearably difficult, that it developed with people like Camus to say, "Vive c'est faire, vive l'absurdité," which is, to live is to keep absurdity alive, or to live is to bring the absurd to life. So our lives are just a joke, basically, is the thing. And it's just a softer existentialist alternate to nihilism. You know, if you've read some Dostoevsky or Jean-Paul Sartre, those are kind of followers of that. I like a bit of Dostoevsky. It's very readable. And it's old. You know, when Jesus spoke to Pontius Pilate and he said, "I've come to bear witness to the truth," Pilate's response is, "What is truth?" And that kind of lack of truth was quite common in Jesus' day in the Roman Empire. The empire lost, the Roman citizens had lost the things that were their core principles. Fides, pietas, majestas, virtus, gravitas. Those 5 principles are key to being a Roman. And they lost them. And they just like, what is truth? There is no truth anymore. It's almost a postmodernist kind of view of life. There is no truth. And so postmodernists millennials might well say there is no objective truth, and that's a new teaching. It's been around 2,000 years. So postmodernism, which is very, very prolific, maybe the very significant worldview around, is truth, if such a thing exists, is a property of culture. There is no absolute truth. All truth is relative. It's created by societies. There's no ultimate moral authority or moral absolute. So to say that the Bible says this, it's like, no. That's your reading of the Bible. There is no absolute truth in the Bible. And for me, it's interesting because when I was a young lad and going off to architecture school, the big rage was postmodernism, with this building here, you know, the MI5 building, which is blown up. And postmodernism was a rage of kind of mimicry. There is no real style of architecture. And it was fashionable for about 10 years, but we all grew to hate it. and everybody went back to modernism. So in architecture, postmodernism is a, and the idea of the term of postmodernism was very much created by architects as a term, and has then spread into philosophy and a way of life. But architects abandoned it 30 years ago as a downward trap. And I love this quote from James Dyer: "Postmodernism pulls a smiling face of arrogance from the face of naturalism, but no face displays a confidence in truth, a trust in reality, or a credible hope for the future." Postmodernism puts a mask on top, but there's nothing behind it. And I wonder if you think it. It's a good question. Do you have? Is there a part of you that thinks that there is no objective truth? Maybe a question for later. New Age. Now, New Age again is a kind of new worldview, but most of it is just a rehash of paganism. It's very significant. And I read some Huxley and Philip K. Dick. I love my science fiction, Robert Heinlein. I like the art of William Blake. I knew something of Carl Jung. And like most of us, we watched The Matrix. That's very much a kind of a new age idea of life. Some aspects of new age worldview are very concerning. In particular, numerous accounts of cosmic consciousness, spiritual beings. It feels very much like it's reviving the principles that Deuteronomy 18, 9-14 was trying to ban, witchcraft. Moving on, deism. Deism sounds good because there's a day, which is a god in there. But, and the US founding fathers, Maggie, hi Maggie, a lot of them believed in deism. They, Washington, Jefferson, Franklin, Madison, they were deists. And so as was Darwin, Einstein. So deism is the historical result of the decay of Christian theism, of Christianity. So Christianity, the decay of that turned into deism. And you get cold deists like Voltaire, who are hostile to Christianity. Guy Thomas Paine: "The only idea man can affix to the name of God is first cause, the cause of all things." So deist, he thinks God started things off and that's it. And you can't know anything about God except that he created the Big Bang. And, so Christianity and all the other religions they're anti them. Buckminster Fuller: "I have faith in the integrity of the anticipatory intellectual wisdom which we may call God." They very much believe in an unknowable God, and there's no point. And they think religions have got it all wrong. And then you get warm deists like Locke, who are not hostile to Christianity, and Franklin. So they recognize that human beings have intelligence, a sense of morality, but none of these, what are built into us as created beings, is grounded in God's character. None has any special relationship to God. Each of us is on our own, is a central tenet to deism. And that's quite scary. And the modern version of this is Yoda and Star Wars and the Force, a mysterious energy field created by life that binds the galaxy together. So deism is alive and kicking, and in the Force, and a lot of people now ascribe to being, the Force as their religion. And it's wrapped up, and maybe some of us have got a little bit of that wrapped up in our worldview. I don't know. Eastern pantheistic monism, which is a kind of all-inclusive for Hinduism and Buddhism. And they're very different in a way. Buddhism teaches there is no God. Hinduism teaches that there are 33 million gods, depending on which way how you count them. And generally the concept is Atman as Brahman is very alien to us. And I think for a lot of people who grew up in the West with Christianity, we might find this one of the hardest worldviews to understand. I've read a bit, you know, some Rudyard Kipling helps a bit, if you've read some of that. You know, so Atman is Brahman. Atman is the soul, the self soul. And when we die, Atman is swallowed up into Brahman, which is the transcendent being of reality. Hinduism isn't really a single religion. It's a kind of amalgamation of many religions which have come together, and they've kind of merged together a bit like the Borg, if you're a Star Trek fan, you know, to get into one. And the physical world is an illusion. The physical world is evil. Suffering is an illusion. And that's really important, because if suffering is an illusion, it's not really there. So there's no real need to kind of alleviate suffering, because it's just an illusion. And you need to just, yeah. On the other hand, Buddhism is possibly not theistic. There is no God, more philosophy or a psychology. But again, suffering, the cause of suffering is desire. And the way to end suffering is to end desire. Again, the physical world is an illusion and not good. So it's a very different way of looking at the world around us. And then we come to theism. And theism, bizarrely, we link Judaism, Christianity, and Islam together as a single God. And I'll probably just skip through this a bit more quickly, because we understand theism a bit better. So Judaism, there are differences. Judaism awaits the Messiah, teaches that Jesus was just a man killed by the Romans, Herzog. Islam teaches there is no Messiah and Jesus was just a prophet. And Jesus says, I'm the way, the truth, and the life, that there is only one path. So it's they aren't the same. And I think that's really important, that, you know, that with some people try to say that, you know, oh, you know, there's a lot of overlap, we have the same. There are intrinsic differences to Christianity, to Judaism and Islam, which probably we're aware of. Yeah. And it's also that Christianity talks about a personal relationship with you and grace to all humanity. And none of the other religions talk about that. That's something that Christian theists have, which nothing else has. That personal relationship, the desire of God to have a personal relationship with you, which is really, really special. And with that is hope and a deep understanding. I thought I'd touch on Augustine. He's a 5th century teacher, and he says we know of God from 2 books, the book of creation and the book of the Bible. And everything in both of those teaches to believe the world is orderly, that in both there is order. So we have the 10 Commandments, we also have the 8 Beatitudes. There's order to that. And in the world, we see gravity, evolution. We see order in both the book of the Bible and the book of life or creation that's outside. And there's great similarities in those 2 books, which Augustine starts to teach lead to a singular, cohesive nature of God, which is very different from many of those worldviews, which are chaotic in many ways. And it's persuasive. And with that, it's worthwhile reminding others that atheists like Anthony Flew, Lee Strobel, and C.S. Lewis, who are real atheists, passionate, have genuinely searched and on the evidence of Christianity abandoned their unbelief. So also let's look at one of the questions was what effect does a Christian worldview have on the people who follow it? And the Christian worldview has given us science. Nearly all science emerged out of Christianity. The abolition of slavery in this country with Wilberforce, civil rights, women's rights, and the majority of all benevolent work in the world is done by Christian groups. And so if you go back to the question, what makes for a good worldview? Is it true? Is it consistent with reality as we can observe it? Does it successfully answer the important questions that humans ask? and are those who ascribe to it better human beings for having taken this as their worldview? Um, I this isn't just about what the worldviews are. There's a second part of it, which is like, how do we reach out to our friends? How do we do this? And I think a big part of that is to ask questions, to have a real genuine curiosity about that. Jesus asked in the New Testament, depends on how you count it, but by the one I found the most, Jesus asked 307 questions. He's asked 183, of which he only answers 3. Um, it's really good if we're following Jesus to ask questions, and to search. And I think that with worldviews, that when we're with our friends, we should really just try and understand them, to understand that the depths of their worldview is very, very different. Now, they may have gone down. I like this image from Jeff's Sky Jethani. Remember, the world's a very scary place, that people really are searching for answers. And now they may have gone, if you look at this, from the valley, they may have gone up a peak, very different, a route very different from you a long, long time ago. And with that, they have a very different view of the world around them. Their worldview is very different from you. And I think generally trying to understand what their worldview is, and to just have that loving curiosity of how they see the world and asking those questions. And it may take time and curiosity, and more than anything, love, to just understand what their view of the world is and what will help them. But it's also a confidence that we have such a great worldview, that we do have an understanding of the scariness of the world and what it would be without that. And that's a great thing about Christianity, which we can come back to. That's it. Thank you very much. Those are the 6. I will try. Malcolm, I'm sure, can help. All of us can help answer the questions as well, but I'd love to pass that on to you.
Thanks, James. Fantastic. I'm totally in admiration of how you managed to pack all that into such a short presentation. That is masterful. Let me just stop the recording before doing anything else. Okay.